Hi, this is Zibby Owens, and you're listening to the award-winning podcast, Moms Don't Have Time to Read Books. I'm also the host of Moms Don't Have Time to Lose Weight, and I'm the editor of the anthology, which you should run out and buy, called Moms Don't Have Time to, a Quarantine Anthology. All proceeds of that book go to COVID-19 vaccine research. And I'm the editor-in-chief of Moms Don't Have Time to Write, a new publication on Medium, and we're accepting submissions, so please send your personal essays there. And if all that isn't enough, you can follow me on Instagram at Zibby Owens, and my website is zibbyowens.com. Okay, now back to this amazing podcast. Gabriela Garcia is the author of Women and Salt. Her fiction and poems have appeared in Best American Poetry, Tin House, Zizia, Iowa Review, Michigan Quarterly Review, the Cincinnati Review, Black Warrior Review, and elsewhere. She received a Rona Jaffe Foundation Writers Award, a Steinbeck Fellowship, and residencies and fellowships from Breadloaf, Sarah Bandy Books, Lighthouse Works, the Keller Estate, and the Community of Writers at Squaw Valley. She has an MFA in fiction from Purdue University, where she also taught creative writing. The daughter of immigrants from Cuba and Mexico, Gabriela was raised in Miami and currently lives in the Bay Area. In her past life, she worked in music, magazines, technology, and feminist and immigrant rights organizing. Welcome, Gabriela. Thank you so much for coming on Moms Don't Have Time to Read Books to discuss Of Women and Salt.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
First of all, congratulations on this being a GMA pick for April and the bestseller list and everything else and all the lists that you've made and everything. Are you just, you must be so excited. That's awesome.
Yeah, no, it's super exciting. It feels unreal still, I feel like it's happening to somebody else. But yeah, I'm just so excited that so many people have connected with the book.
It's truly beautiful. I've literally been recommending it left, right, and center. All these events, what are you reading? What are you loving? I was like, this book is so good. Oh. I also then slip in, and it's only 200 pages.
Yes.
Because, I feel like it's actually a little bit shorter than most novels that have been coming out lately or that I've been reading. Did you do that intentionally? I have a zillion other questions, but.
Yeah. I knew I sort of wanted to write a compact novel and to sort of offer these brief glimpses of these people's lives rather than a traditional historical epic that's 400 pages. I didn't want to trace the whole life of all of these women just offered in snippets. But yeah, I feel throughout the pandemic, I've struggled to concentrate and read and have appreciated some shorter reads. So I'm glad that's that was exciting to you.
Moms don't have time. That's funny. So I saw an interview with you where you were talking about your own background and how, having grown up in Miami to parents who are from Cuba and Mexico, sort of inspired writing about a character like you didn't feel was particularly represented, and that your experience hadn't been written about in the same way. So I was hoping you could talk a little about the inspiration for this book and how it came to be, especially as a debut novelist. This is so great.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, so none of the characters are really autobiographical. I'm actually pretty different from almost every single character in the way I grew up and everything. But I think, sort of what I was referencing in that is that I grew up in Miami, which is one of the few cities, maybe the only one, I'm not sure, that's Latinx majority. But, there are all of these sort of divisions along racial lines, along class lines. And I think, maybe being the daughter of a Cuban immigrant, of a Mexican immigrant who had, different sort of paths to migration in the US. And I think I always sort of felt that tension. And so I wanted to write about Miami and all of its complexity and these really very different families who are living next door to each other. There's Jeanette, the daughter of Cuban immigrants, and she witnesses her neighbor, Gloria, who is Salvadoran, be taken by ICE agents, and her daughter is sort of accidentally left behind. And so that's sort of the catalyst that brings these two families together. But yeah, I think I was sort of interested in mining some of that complexity in Miami.
I loved all the imagery of Gloria and her fascination with birds, and all when she was in the deportment camp. I don't know what to call it.
The family detention center.
Family detention center. Sorry. Thank you. And like you have a fascination, maybe I shouldn't say it's fascination. You include animals in a lot of different places with like the jaguar surprise and like the bird analogies. And I just feel like you weave in all these very, natural world elements into the narrative. Tell me about that.
Yeah, it's interesting because I think I didn't even necessarily notice that until people started pointing it out to me, but it makes sense because I myself have always been, sort of fascinated by birds and animals. And I think, maybe some of what I was gesturing toward is the wildness that exists in people, and sort of these different animals like offer a kind of glimpse into these characters and how they think and how they sort of see the world, and in particular like the character of Gloria, who's really into birds. I wanted to sort of show this other facet of her personality as she's going through this really difficult experience, that she's just this like complex, interesting person. Mm-hmm.
And how some animals, so some birds even like commit suicide, and how some birds are so bereft when they're like away from their loved ones that they can't survive. I don't know. It's just like this really powerful image among many.
Yeah. I think I remember coming across that fact about those birds that sort of plunge to their death. And I never sort of, that image just stayed with me for a really long time. And I was like, I want to include this in something that I write. Mm-hmm.
You also did such a great job, I thought. Well, first of all, of like creating all these characters who feel completely lifelike, but also talking about their relationships with men along the way and their relationships to their own sexuality, and whether it's being a young girl sort of like, at the gas station, provocatively leaning in and ending up at like a bubble party, to Mario and Jeanette's like on again, off again, essentially, abusive relationship, to other male figures in the book. And you had this one paragraph I was hoping to read from the beginning about when when Jeanette had broken up with Mario. And you said, that other life feels so distant now. All she can feel when it's just two voices across an expanse is the knowing that still survives. The body her fingertips memorize, the universe of a relationship, all its language and borders and landscapes, a geography she studied for years and still does not understand, a man who pummels a fist into her side the same day he takes in a kitten found lying in the crook of a stairwell during a rainstorm. Nobody knows about the fights that got physical. Nobody knows these phone calls still happen. She thinks of Anna in the next room listening to the credits, thinks how even the best mothers in the world can't always save their daughters. Wow, that was beautiful.
Thank you.
Tell me a little more about this passage and how sometimes you have to hold on to pieces of the relationship, right? When you shouldn't.
Yeah. I mean, I think especially when it comes to abusive relationships, like there's such a complexity in relationships. Like rarely do you ever meet someone who's just fully a monster and has no other aspects to their personality. And, I think in that case, like she's struggling with that. She's struggling with the tenderness and the connection she has in this relationship, while also this man is incredibly violent and toxic to her. And so I sort of wanted to plumb that a little bit. There's always like this question of why women don't leave, which, it's really complex and there's so many reasons, but I think one of them too is that some of these relationships can be really confusing, And so I think in that section, Jeanette is sort of struggling with that and how to sort of situate herself in this relationship history that she has with this man. And part of what it's pointing to also is the way that, when two people have an intense intimacy, other people can sort of look at that relationship from the outside, but nobody truly understands it at all, except the two people who are in it. And that I think can be really difficult to communicate. And so I think she's also thinking about that, just the universe of their relationship that is so enclosed, Yeah.
And then you have Jeanette, who's sort of struggling with the aftermath of her extrication from this relationship and addiction. And then her mother, who was literally like channeling Martha Stewart on Thanksgiving and trying to make sure everything in her surroundings were completely perfect. And how different you made that mother and daughter. I mean, there's so many mother-daughter relationships throughout this book that are all so interesting because, of course, that relationship is such a unique one that has so many different iterations. But the fact that she cares so much about how she looks and how it seems, and then her daughter, you know, is almost the opposite, right? And that she shows up looking her best in like a tank top and jeans or something like that. Mm-hmm. Tell me a little more about that relationship and sort of the need to control or to seem like everything is okay when it's really not.
Yeah. And I think you're right. I think mother-daughter relationships can be some of the most intense, complicated relationships. And I think, I think sort of both Jeanette and her mother are dealing with the aftermath of trauma and violence, but they deal with it in very different ways, and both are sort of destructive to themselves, but are just very different, and Carmen is sort of bearing a lot inside of her and just trying to portray herself as having it all together. And that sort of damages a lot of her relationships. And yeah, I think part of what I really wanted to do in the book and portraying these mother-daughter pairs is sort of point to the complexity of motherhood and these characters. I wanted to sort of write against some of the tropes that exist about, women being strong or, immigrant mothers in particular being like suffering and sacrificing all the time. And not that, the mothers here don't suffer or sacrifice, but they're so much more than that. They're so much more complicated. Gloria at some points like questions if she even wants to be a mother. And Carmen is sort of distracted by all of her own inner turmoil and struggles to really see her daughter. So they're really complicated in that way. And also, they're all sort of surviving circumstances, but, I like I said, I didn't want them just to be strong, survivors. Like I wanted to also show the cost of that survival, that sometimes, you're able to survive in this like patriarchal misogynist world that they're in, but there's a huge cost to that too, in the self. And so that's, I was thinking about all of that when I was thinking about motherhood. Mm-hmm.
I got the chills when Jeanette found, I hope this is not giving, when she found the book that said force written in the margin, mm-hmm. Oh my God, like what a moment, like, especially because like all your scenes, they're all just so visual. Like you can feel like the dust when the car breaks down in the village, right? You can like hear the creaks of the porch with the grandmother and her like sleeveless dress. And like, I don't know, you just like have all these moments that are so amazing. And then to discover these ancient books. And of course, have the first thought be like, well, could I sell an old book like this? Mm-hmm. But this notion across centuries or over centuries and across generations of force and how people get through things. Is that like one of the takeaways, not to like encapsulate your book in just like one thing, but just that our force, like our will to survive essentially?
Yeah. I think there's so many different ways of thinking about that word force. And I think maybe that's why I was drawn to that phrase in these letters from Victor Hugo to Cuban workers. I think there's that. There's like what you said, like the force, the will to survive. There's also the way there are like historical forces, at play that sort of pass through the generations. There are the ways that, some of these women are sort of forced into circumstances where they have to sort of fight for agency, so I think there's so many different ways of sort of looking at that phrase. And so I was sort of drawn to that kind of ambiguity and the fact that it can mean all of these different things that are at play in the novel.
So, Gabriela, tell me how you became this amazing novelist. I know you have an MFA, but like, how did this start? Did you always know you wanted to be a writer? Did you always write fiction? Like, how did we get here?
Yeah, so I yeah, I have always loved writing since I was a little girl. Like before I could even write, I used to tell stories to my mom. I would like dictate them and she would write them down. So I feel like I've been writing fiction and poetry and everything all my life, but it's not something that I sort of pursued seriously until, like a good 10 years after graduating from undergrad. And I didn't study creative writing in undergrad. I never took a workshop actually until my MFA. I had many different jobs, in music and magazines. Eventually I became an organizer working for feminist organizations and migrant justice organizations, and I was doing writing in all of these jobs, but not, creatively. And then I just got to a point where I really wanted to take my fiction seriously. And I thought, I'll apply to these programs that I'm really interested in. And if I don't get in, like, I'll just, continue down this path. And if I do, like, I'll dedicate myself to really pursuing this. And so I was really excited to get into, one of the programs that I was really excited about at Purdue. And yeah, the novel sort of really came together in those 3 years of my MFA. Mm-hmm.
And what are you working on, another novel now, or what are you up to now?
Yeah, I haven't started on a novel. Like I do want to write another one, but right now I'm mostly writing poetry, mostly working on short stories. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Did you ever conceive of this book as short stories? Was it ever like short stories about some of these women?
Yeah, so I sort of knew when I started that I didn't want to write a kind of chronological linear storyline, but I wasn't entirely sure of how I wanted that structure to work. There was a point where I was like, oh, maybe this is like a linked short story collection, like a novel and stories. And then I started adding in pieces that didn't really work as standalone stories. And at some point, I just gave myself permission to not have to like define exactly what this is, But yeah, that's sort of the backstory behind the structure.
So when you're not writing, like, what are some of the things you love to do?
So I've been roller skating a lot during the pandemic, like many people.
I don't know anybody else who's been roller skating during the pandemic.
Really? I feel like maybe I'm just like hyper aware of it because I started roller skating, but I feel like there are all these roller skating videos and people are, have
really? Oh my gosh.
Yeah. And they sort of like made this impromptu roller rink by my house, by the lake. Like it's just like a parking lot and a bunch of people go out there to roller skate. So it's really fun. And yeah, I mean, I read a ton, obviously. I draw a little bit. I like to draw. What else do I do?
What kind of books do you like to read?
I read, fiction, literary fiction. I read a lot of poetry too. Sometimes I read, nonfiction, memoir stuff. Yeah, I read pretty broadly, I think.
And do you still sort of keep your activist hat on?
Yeah, I mean, I've done some work with organizations I previously worked with this year, but not in a full-time capacity like I used to do, just because it's really hard to sort of try to juggle that with all of the writing stuff and the book coming out. But yeah, I've been mostly sort of focused on book stuff.
I bet. Awesome. Do you have advice for aspiring authors?
I think, the thing that's been absolutely most helpful for me has been being part of writing communities. And I think if that's in the form of an MFA, if that's just in the form of like attending more literary events wherever you are, sort of creating that community, I think just, writing can be such a solitary pursuit, and being part of a community has just really sustained me, nourished me. So I think that would be my advice, to either find or create those communities.
Awesome. Great. Well, thank you so much. Thank you for this beautiful, beautiful book. And I truly loved it. And these characters are going to stay with me for a while. Is this going to be a movie? Did it get optioned yet? I'm sure it has, but
not yet.
What? Crazy. Oh, well, even just the image of the cigar factories and reading under the amazing. Like I could just go on and on, but I won't bore you. I'm sure you're used to this.
So much.
Anyway,
Yeah.
Congratulations. Well done. Awesome.
Yeah.
I can't wait to see what else you write.
Thank you.
Okay. Have a great day. Thank you. Thanks for listening to this episode of Moms Don't Have Time to Read Books. Don't forget to follow me on Instagram at Zibby Owens and at Moms Don't Have Time to Read Books. Also sign up for my newsletter at zibbyowens.com and sign up for my virtual book club and meet lots of authors on Zoom every other week. Thanks so much to Steve and Ryan at Texture Sound for the sound editing. And thank you to Morning Moon Productions for providing this fantastic intro and outro music.